Thank you very much indeed for the opportunity to talk to you. So I'm from the RICS, look after the UK, Europe, Middle East and Africa region. There we go. A little overview of what we're going to be doing. This building is fabulous, isn't it? I happen to work in a building on Parliament Square, which in itself is a bit of an icon, Parliament Square in London and the building. So to come somewhere like this, it's quite special for me. The organisation, I don't know how many of you know much about the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. We're an independent, self-regulating professional body. We operate right across land, property, construction and infrastructure. We set and enforce professional and ethical standards. And the constitution under which we were set up demands that we act in the public interest. It demands that we act in the public interest. So there can be no taking on board what valuers or any other part of the profession would like us to do unless it's within the public interest. And we cover the full property life cycle. I think that's really important. And as you look at the numbers there, there are many qualified members around the globe. And we're also coming up for our own special anniversary just next year. And so we've got a track record. We've been established. We know what we're doing. We're all about creating confidence through professional standards. And it's confidence through three pillars, really. It's getting education and training in place. So that's setting a benchmark for those professionals coming in so that they've got to reach a certain standard, but they've also got to maintain a standard throughout their professional life. The second part, and this is probably what sets us apart from many other organisations that might set standards, is that we actually regulate against those standards as well. So every day of every week, we're looking at the work that valuers do to make sure it's complying with the standards that we set out. So taken together and with the standards that we've got, when you've got those three together, we're aiming to give confidence to the public and confidence to markets. And I think just to think about international standards, we've promulgated RICS standards for many years. And I think if you take this in the context of financial reporting standards, so international IFRS has been around now for a number of years, and 150 or so countries around the world have signed up to that. And it's brilliant, fabulous. However, it suffers a little bit from garbage in and garbage out. So you've got a whole bunch of valuations that are helping you do your reporting. And if they're done on a different basis, well, guess what? The output is going to give you different results. So we said many years ago, actually, that there ought to be one common valuation standard globally. And international valuation standards was what was produced to help with that. But interestingly, and I think particularly pertinent to the work that we're talking about today, is that behind those valuation standards, the way that things are measured can be very different. So if you've got a indice that's saying this property is more energy efficient than that property, well, that might be true and it might not be true, actually, because it depends on how you measured the property. And virtually every country around the world has different ways of measuring properties. So we brought together a coalition to say, how should properties be measured? What is the common standard that everybody could work to? So just as you look at this room, so how high is the ceiling? Okay, well, where are you going to start from and where are you going to finish? Get 50 different standards and you will get 50 different answers. How wide is the building? Does it come to this wall? Does it go to the window? again, different standards will get you different answers. So there aren't underpins that will help you get to the answer, or there weren't until the coalition of measuring professional bodies came together to say, we'll produce one standard. Similarly with land measurement and with construction measurement standards. And I'll return to the theme of construction and land because it's all in the life cycle. Luca and I were talking earlier about the, how energy efficient would this building be? And there's kind of a vaguely obvious answer that, well, it's 500 years old and the heat will dissipate out of this quite quickly when you turn the heating on in the winter. However, it's been in place for 500 years. So over the life cycle of the property and thinking about the materials that were used and the land that was used to get this property in its current state, it probably, I don't know how to do the calculation, it probably stacks up far better than you would imagine. So it really matters about the base data that you're using. And when you think about real estate, it's so important on a global scale. And the numbers that you see on the screen actually are fairly similar within Europe. But also, if you think that, and it was referenced earlier, buildings equate to around about 40% of energy consumption. I think it takes up, the building construction takes up somewhere over 50% of consumption of all materials. And at the rate at which the world is building, means that within the next 50 to 70 years, we'll run out of materials. Okay? So when you're thinking about what's your balance sheet going to look like in the next generation of your bank, and many of the banks that are represented have been around even longer than the RICS, well, in the next generation, unless we've done something about this, seriously done something about it, changed the way that we build buildings, changed the way that we manage buildings, changed the way that we consume energy in buildings, then we won't have any balance sheets. Because we'll have run out of materials, we'll have run out of energy to heat those buildings. So, thinking then about the role of valuation here, critically important in part of the global financial system and its stability. We know valuations consist of a range of data that inform decisions by governments, investors, lenders. Valuation is a highly important aspect of the measurement and engagement of real estate risk and management of that risk. And from a public benefit point of view, valuations help consumers determine the value of some of their biggest personal investments. It's also, and I'm an ex-banker, okay? I spent 25 years in wealth and retail banking, so I feel as though I can speak some of your language, the Welsh to the English. It's art and science. And I say that and say it again because I think that that's what finance and investment and banking is as well. There's a huge amount of science in it, but actually there's an art in it as well. You take your decisions not just on the algorithms. Well, heck, who would need this room full of bankers if we were just using algorithms? There's a bit of art in there too, and that's the same in valuation. I think the role of valuation, two really important points to be made here. The valuers are the independent axis around which the property information flows. They're information managers in many ways in what are often highly opaque markets. And they don't make the market, they really reflect the market. Trends, I think both the real estate lending sector, whether it's commercial or residential, have been a bit slower than real estate equity investment sector when it comes to incorporating sustainability into the business strategy. I think the simple reality is that mortgage banks aren't as close to the buildings as their owners. The distribution of ownership beneath the lender is so wide, there's no way that we could be. However, there is a marked change happening, and we've got to take the opportunity now to make a real difference. So what should the valuer's responsibility be? Well, I think if sustainability is such a material global concern, then we've got to get a reasonable response to what the expectation of the profession is. And looking at the questions on the screen, well, I think the answer to all of those is probably yes, but there's got to be a careful balancing act. Valuers aren't at the moment sustainability experts. The sustainability has only recently entered the lexicon of their language and into their curriculum. And the valuer can't make the market either. And it's really important for us to understand what the liability will be when it comes to performance risk and the frequent gap between anticipated and achieved energy savings. So I don't pretend to know the answer to that. That's what the working group are getting focused on. There's a lot of guidance around already. Most of the guidance is of a voluntary nature. There are a couple of particularly notable exceptions to that. I'm pleased to say that the RICS Red Book is one of those. If we've got valuers who operate to the RICS Red Book, that's what they have to deliver against. It's not a choice for them. They have to deliver. And I know that the German valuation order is also similar to that. We've also been involved in the EU Reno Value project and getting involved in the ongoing Revalue project. But I think the important thing is, if you think back to that slide about consistency of standards and the international valuation standard, unless we get one clear standard for everybody to work to, you're taking a guess when you make your assessments of the valuation that's put in front of you. So I've skipped a couple there. So we know there's lots of evidence out there. I think we've already talked about it. Most of this is post-event evidence, and we absolutely need that. We also need to start developing some models that help us get closer to what's happening as we're making the assessments. Lots of existing market barriers, but I think this is back to the language question. People are sat around saying, oh, well, if only. And it's all a bit like back in the banking crisis stage. Whose fault was it? Well, it wasn't the banker's fault. It wasn't the lawyer's fault. It wasn't the valuer's fault. It wasn't really anybody's fault. Everybody was going like this. It's you, it's you, it's you. And to an extent, it's true, if you want to sit in that world. And I have the privilege of having a German mother-in-law. And it's quite convenient sometimes that I don't speak German, because in the moment I don't know what she's saying. And that's sometimes quite convenient in the moment. Over the longer term, it's not so helpful. and we've got to learn each other's language. We really have got to learn each other's language and take the time to say, okay, what are the counterparties saying to me? What's really important here? So what do we know so far? We've talked about difficulties of translation, and they don't translate directly necessarily into asset value. Energy efficiency is not the only potential driver, and we sometimes struggle to get access to sufficiently reliable and consistent data. I think the other thing that comes out of this is that, and particularly when you look at mortgage valuations for personal home purchase, and I went through this process just 6 months ago, is actually it's an emotional driven response. Who gets the list of property to look at based on the energy performance certificate? Okay, anybody in the room bought on that criteria? No? No? How many bedrooms? What sort of period was it built? There's all those sorts of things that really come into your decision, aren't there? Nobody's saying, right, I'll only buy an A-rated property or one that's got the potential to be A-rated. It's an emotional decision. We've got to understand that and work within those boundaries. Valuation instructions, there are so few. The very best number here is somewhere under 50% of the investors ask for sustainability data when they're looking at a valuation. The rest are way behind that. We've simply got to change it. We've got a way forward. We're mapping a way forward through process. As I say, absolutely work in progress. And we absolutely, to reiterate points from many other speakers, we need your help in doing this. If we all sit in our own little silo and say, well, they can get on with it, we all know it won't happen. So please, please engage. Help us understand your processes. We'll deal with it absolutely confidentially. We recognise that there will be commercial differences to how you treat data. And so if I had 3 wishes, these are my 3 wishes. We've got to get quality and regulated standards. We've got to have consistency applied. We've got to have everything done in a transparent manner, because that together will bring confidence to the markets, and that will help us all produce a better future. Thank you very much indeed for your time.